In January 1985, the AV-8B Harrier jet achieved initial operating capability with 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing. VMA 311, also known as the Tomcats, were the first USMC squadron to employ the Harrier in Operation Desert Storm. Notable accomplishments of the AV-8B Harrier, including the first USMC aircraft to employ night attack capabilities in October of 1991, as well as serving in many operations that required aviation support, such as Operation Southern Watch and Operation Iraqi Freedom, in which 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing's own VMFA 214 recorded over 1,900 combat sorties and 236,000 pounds of ordnance dropped utilizing the jet. AV-8B Harriers have proved to be versatile aircrafts as they are vertical short, takeoff, and landing capable fighter attack jets. They are able to operate off small aircraft carriers, large amphibious assault ships, and from forward operating bases. This uniquely capable aircraft has continued to fly in almost all conflicts that have utilized marine aviation. Marines have spent decades maintaining and flying the AV-8B Harrier. For nearly 40 years, the AV-8B Harrier has demonstrated its aptitude and embodies the lethality and tenacity of the Marine Corps. In March 2020, the United States Marine Corps announced Force Design 2030, an initiative to redesign the force for naval expeditionary warfare. These initiatives are informed by 2 operational concepts: patrol operations in a contested environment and expeditionary advanced base operations. On March 25, 2022, the United States Marine Corps bid farewell to the Harrier as it continues to welcome the technologically superior F-35 jets.
your job, right, is to keep it right there.
Are those gonna go there? Come on, stop, stop. Cool. They're going up.
it's more complicated than a lot of fixed-wing aircraft by virtue of the fact that you have an almost infinite variety of ways of getting airborne and landing again. A normal conventional aircraft gets airborne at a set speed and lands at a set speed. With the Harrier, you have from zero, i.e. vertical takeoff and landing, all the way through to fully conventional, which can be up around about 160 miles an hour.
The jump jet Harrier, often considered the world's smallest and most elusive combat aircraft, stands as a truly distinctive creation. In the event of a conflict between the Warsaw Pact and NATO, it's virtually assured that all NATO airfields would be obliterated within a mere 24 hours, and potentially even within 24 minutes. Consequently, NATO would be left devoid of any land-based air power, save for a limited number of Harriers strategically dispersed for concealment and combat readiness. Regrettably, many individuals have underestimated the significance of this aircraft. The Harrier fleet saw a notable reduction in numbers following the Falklands campaign. In that conflict, Harrier and the Sea Harriers executed fighter and attack missions under conditions that would have rendered any other fast jet inoperable. It has been nearly 7 decades since the Harrier's precursor, the Hawker, first touched down. Over this time, the Harrier family has undergone remarkable advancements, and its story was far from complete. Around 1954, the press humorously dubbed this particular invention the flying bedstead, often seen as a jest. However, the underlying concept of vertical takeoff using jet engine thrust hinted at a potential for high-speed aircraft to function without traditional airfields. In essence, they were engineered for survivability in times of war. By 1955, 2 short SC-1s were built in Belfast, each fitted with 5 RB-108 turbojets. 4 were arranged amidst ships, pointing down to provide lift. The 5th one was in the tail to provide thrust in the normal way.
The SC-1 was the first research aircraft, flat rising, not tail swing, to use the principle of separate lift engines. In theory, these could be shut down for flying around on the wings, and you use this for propulsion. This did not contribute to lift in VTOL. You lit up 4 lift engines in the case of this SC-1 aircraft, and having fired them up and decelerated, you landed on the thrust in these engines.
With Chief Test Pilot Tom Brooks Smith in the cockpit, the throttles of the 4 lift jets were opened up. The SC-1 had the ability to ascend vertically from the ground and then maintain hover using compressed air jets located at the wingtips, nose, and tail. By increasing the engine throttle at the tail, the SC-1 could be propelled forward. As the speed picked up, the wings generated more lift, eventually allowing 4 lift jets to be shut down, a phase known as accelerating transition. Upon completing the flight, a deceleration transition was necessary to return engine-supported hovering flight, followed by a vertical landing. This era marked the prominence of VTOL, which stands for vertical takeoff and landing. In California, the US Air Force and Ryan were experimenting with a simpler VTOL design that demanded exceptional piloting skills. Powered by a British Rolls-Royce engine, the X-13 Vertijet could either take off down a runway like conventional jets or stand vertically on its tail for VTOL. With its compact fuselage tilted at a 90-degree angle, it relied on its jet for propulsion and could move up or down based on the pilot's careful and precise manipulation of the throttle lever. Similar to the bedstead and SC-1, compressed air jets were used to control the way it hovered. Its airfield was a sizable flatbed vehicle known as the ground service trailer, with a large platform that could be raised vertically using hydraulic rams. The Delta Wing Vertijet would take off or return to the trailer, akin to a moth landing on a wall. Transitions between wing-borne and jet-borne flight, both accelerating and decelerating, were skillfully executed by Pete Gerard, the test pilot making the Vertijet an impressive spectacle. But unless it could have been linked with computerized blind landing systems, it was impractical for an air force.
When the German aircraft designers got back into business after World War II, they were 10 years behind the Americans, the British, the Russians. They decided rather than try and catch up, they'd leapfrog over the technology, which is why they went for vertical takeoff. Kurt Tank was famous for producing tough, reliable, battle-hardened aircraft that could survive a lot of damage. He took that design philosophy into the post-war era in building the VAC 191. In effect, the 191 is a modern VTOL version of his old World War II Focke-Wulf 190.
It was, however, the Europeans who pioneered military VTOL because, being nearer to a potential attacker, they saw the jet lift could enable their aircraft to escape from their highly vulnerable airfields. West Germany built the VAC-191B. The aircraft featured a central lift cruise engine with nozzles that could be directed either to the rear or downward. Additionally, there were single lift jets in the front and rear fuselage, which were adapted from the SC-1 and used exclusively during takeoff and landing.
In the post-war years, there were lots of wacky VTOL projects, but Kurt Tank's VAC 191 is a beautiful little airplane. It really worked. Willie Messerschmitt was a fighter pro. He knew that burdening a fighter with useless lift engines would be a complete waste of time. But Messerschmitt was good at thinking out the box. He had a solution. To speed up the development process, Messerschmitt used the fuselage of the American F-104 Starfighter that he was already building for the Luftwaffe. In effect, his VTOL VJ-101 is actually a vertical takeoff starfighter.
A distinct German prototype was the VJ-101, equipped with 6 Rolls-Royce turbojets. 2 of them were positioned vertically in the fuselage solely for VTOL operations, while the other 4 were mounted in pods on the wingtips. These pods could pivot to direct the jets downward during VTOL or rearward for supersonic flight. Another early jet lift aircraft was constructed by Dassault in France. Based on the Mirage 3 supersonic fighter, the Balzac had an enlarged fuselage housing 8 RB-108 lift engines. However, none of these remarkable aircraft projects led to significant developments. In contrast, a simpler type of VTOL jet aircraft, featuring only a single engine and minimal cockpit instrumentation, gradually transformed tactical air warfare. It not only enabled power to be deployed from virtually any location, but also made it possible to win wars that might have been otherwise impossible to fight. Among the many research models tested in wind tunnels, the one described here underwent testing on a rotating arm. Researchers faced numerous challenges, many of which were unprecedented. Concerns about the tailplane being thrusted violently downward when the rear jet nozzles were angled downward under the tail were eventually dispelled through model testing. This pioneering VTOL aircraft was the Hawker P-1127, a groundbreaking innovation. For the first time in aviation history, an aircraft powered by a single jet engine could rise vertically from the ground with its fuselage in a standard horizontal orientation and accelerate under precise control to attain jet fighter speeds. This prototype was a later P-1127 called Kestrel, first flown in March 1964. This was 3.5 years after the first tentative tethered hover of the first P-1127. With its unusual landing gear retracted, the Kestrel could do most things a 1950s jet fighter could do. It could also slow to a standstill, hover in midair if necessary, and finally make a feather-light vertical landing. During a high-speed pass at the Farnborough Airshow, 2 Kestrels and a Hunter aircraft demonstrated that the small Kestrel, despite the inherent challenges of its hover capability, outperformed the conventional Hunter in terms of speed, range, and rate of climb. This remarkable feat was made possible by the groundbreaking Pegasus engine, which was developed by Bristol Siddeley and became part of Rolls-Royce in 1966. The Pegasus engine was a truly innovative design, as it was the first turbofan engine to feature 4 nozzles. 2 nozzles were located on each side at the front to handle the air from the fan, while the other 2 were positioned at the rear to manage the hot gases from the jet. It's important to note that these nozzles were not integral to the engine itself, but were part of the aircraft. This unique design made the basic engine exceptionally compact while delivering substantial power, generating approximately 21,500 pounds of thrust, all within a length of about 8 feet. To install the Pegasus engine, it was lowered into the fuselage from above and then connected to the 4 nozzles. These nozzles were strategically arranged, with 2 in front of the aircraft's center of gravity and 2 behind it, ensuring that the thrust lifted the aircraft vertically without tipping it forward onto its nose or backward onto its tail. To assess the performance of the exceptional Pegasus engine, specialized ground test beds were conducted at Bristol. The engine's exhaust was channeled away from the building through twin ducts. The test engine was positioned on a cradle high within the building, and the test bed was designed to simultaneously measure both vertical and horizontal thrust. It was also versatile, able to accommodate future vectored thrust or vertical lift engines. On this alternative outdoor testbed, the engine is started, and then the nozzles are rotated not downwards, but upwards, so that the four jets do not blast straight onto the ground as they would in the aircraft. The pilot or the operator on the testbed has just a single lever to control the nozzles. Twin compressed air-powered motors drive through shafts and strong chains to rotate all four nozzles in exact unison. The four nozzles on these aircraft boasts remarkable agility, capable of moving through their entire 99-degree range in just 1 second. These nozzles are indispensable components, akin to wings in conventional aircraft. For a vertical takeoff, during the taxiing and engine warm-up phase, the nozzles are maintained in a horizontal position to prevent ground erosion and the ingestion of debris. When the throttle is open to full power, the nozzles pivot downward, allowing the aircraft to ascend vertically. To transition into forward flight, the nozzles are gradually rotated backward. The aircraft accelerates forward and attains typical wing-borne flight speed. The aircraft's large inlets have generously rounded lips and perform well at low speeds. During training, pilots practice numerous VTOs followed by transitioning into wing-borne flight. With the nozzles angled at 75 degrees, the four jets still provide 96% of the maximum vertical lift, while also generating a 25% horizontal component sufficient for forward acceleration. This can be achieved with a fuselage nearly level. In the mid-1960s, P-1127 and Kestrel aircraft executed numerous VTOs under various conditions, including takeoff from rain-soaked runways, grassy surfaces, and even desert environments. From the outset, it was recognized that as an alternative to VTO, pilots could perform short takeoff. To initiate an STO, the engine is opened up with the nozzles pointing forward. This results in substantial forward acceleration without causing ground erosion. Once a suitable speed is reached, the pilot tilts the nozzle down to 55 degrees, allowing the aircraft to leap off the ground, propelled partly by its small wing and partly by the jets. The aircraft continues to accelerate. STO allows the aircraft to take off with a significantly heavier payload of fuel and weapons. By 1964, it was apparent that the standard operational method would involve short takeoffs and vertical landings. In between, pilots would make fast passes up to 600 knots before coming back to harbor. Then, at very low level, they would practice using the puffer jet reaction controls of the wingtips, nose, and tail. Fed with the highly compressed air from the engine, these high-powered jets enable the pilot to pitch, roll, pirouette, or just hold the aircraft over a fixed point, even in a strong wind. When the pilot's control stick is centered, the puffer jets are shut off. Of course, as one of the key advantages of VTOL or STOVL is that the aircraft can fly from any spot of reasonably level ground. A lot of the early trials involved rough strips, though the main development flying was done from Hawker's airfield at Dunsfold. One of the early problems was directional stability in hovering flight, because the huge airflow into the engine inlets overcame the natural weather cock stability. Pilots could often be seen making 360-degree turns exploring the handling. The early P-1127s required constant attention and posed a new and unique challenge.
We'd done some flying on helicopters. We'd flown a variable stability helicopter to understand what these numbers like radians per second squared per inch of stick meant. That's control sensitivity. And we'd also done a little bit of hovering on the short SC-1, which had 4 lift engines, separate propulsive engine to get a feel for jet reaction controls. So it was with that background that we started the tethered hovering. You don't require any courage to do tethered hovering. You're controlled from going out of control by the tethers themselves. We had phenomenal numbers of problems. I mean, in terms of getting the correct control powers, getting the correct feel, getting the correct sensitivity, getting the right gearing from the throttle to the engine, all these things had to be resolved. Then when we started taxiing and going for conventional flight, we found that when putting the brakes on, triggered the natural frequency of the undercarriage and snapped it off like a carrot. We also had occasion to have very severe outrigger shimmy during a high-speed taxiing, and a lot of aerodynamic problems that were affected by the jet efflux blowing underneath the wings and onto the tailplane.
These aircraft were akin to the Wright Flyer of jet VTOL, representing a pioneering step in aviation. To address some of the challenges, in 1963, the United Kingdom, the United States, and the Federal Republic of Germany decided to jointly fund a tripartite squadron. Each nation financed 3 improved P-1127s known as Kestrels. In 1967, the squadron became operational, consisting of pilots from the RAF, U.S. Army, Navy, Air Force, and the Luftwaffe. It marked the first time in history that combat pilots had to be fully trained on both fast jets and helicopters. Even so, this training did not fully prepare them for the complexities of operating transonic jet-lift aircraft that could conceal themselves in wooded areas and take off from locations accessible to a jeep traveling at 40 miles an hour. While all pilots found vertical takeoff, VTO, relatively straightforward, it often caused ground erosion problems. The accelerating transition, followed by a fast, low-level pass, was a source of enjoyment for everyone. The 9 Kestrels were adorned with unique roundels and fin flashes that incorporated the national markings of the 3 participating countries. However, these aircraft remained early in their design, equipped with little more than a simple gun sight and a camera in the nose, though they theoretically could be fitted with 2 underwing pylons. Most of the flying was conducted from RAF West Rainham and Norfolk and the surrounding countryside. Multinational ground crews were responsible for aircraft servicing. This period yielded substantial experience in taxiing and rolling takeoffs from paved and rough strips. Experiments were conducted using various types of surface protection, including metal planks, discs, flexible sheets, and even bright pink fiberglass sprayed on soil or grass. The squadron also explored rough field rolling landings, which resolved issues related to ground erosion and the ingestion of hot gas or debris into the engine. Often, the squadron operated as a cohesive unit, and in theory, it was possible to fire the engine starter cartridges and then, within seconds, take off vertically. However, in practice, it was soon determined that the most effective operating technique was short takeoff and vertical landing, which has remained the preferred method ever since. After 9 months of operation, 938 sorties had been flown, and it appeared that there was little more to learn with these rudimentary machines. 6 of the Kestrels were sent to the USA, where they were designated as XV-6A. They flew sporadically from Edwards, Patuxent River, and Fort Campbell. However, the limited American interest in STOVL aircraft relegated them to the status of curiosities. In Britain, there was a much more pragmatic appreciation of the potential value of these aircraft in any future conflict. Back in 1963, a P-1127 had flown from the big carrier Ark Royale, and in June 1966, a Kestrel carried out more serious trials from the smaller Harrier HMS Bulwark. These trials were integrated with the flying of Wessex helicopters. At the start, it was established that the guidance directions of a batsman were unnecessary. Numerous VTOs were made with the ship underway, and it was also found possible to hover in the lee of the island in a region subjected to considerable turbulence. VLs were made off various kinds of approach. The conventional approach for helicopters involved approaching the ship from the stern on the port side and then translating sideways to reach the deck. However, this approach was found to be unnecessarily complex, and jet pilots much preferred a straightforward, straight-in approach from the stern. In 1966, the government finally reconsidered its stance on permitting manned combat aircraft, overturning a decree from 1957. This development allowed the P-1127 and Kestrel to evolve into the Harrier. The Harrier represented a complete redesign, even though it might not have appeared significantly different at first glance. One of the early Harrier GR-1 aircraft, where GR stands for Ground Attack and Reconnaissance, underwent a remarkable series of trials, taking off from the small helicopter pad at the stern of the cruiser Blake. The pad was considerably smaller than any area from which jet-lift aircraft had previously operated, and the ship often experienced a 12-degree roll with gusty winds of up to 35 knots. Additionally, the pad was downwind of a large superstructure, which typically housed the ship's helicopter and air officers' control position, causing severe turbulence. Consequently, every takeoff from this location had to be a vertical takeoff, and every landing a vertical landing. Despite these challenges, the entire program of flying proceeded flawlessly, leaving the ship's crew quite impressed when the Harrier was eventually ordered for the RAF. It was anticipated that these aircraft would frequently operate from the two remaining Royal Navy fleet carriers, the Ark Royale and the Eagle. In March 1970, two Harrier GR1s from the RAF conducted extended trials from HMS, Her Majesty's ship Eagle. By this point, it was established that Harriers could operate from ships, but these tests aimed to demonstrate that genuine combat missions could be flown. As the trials continued, the takeoff weight of the Harriers was progressively increased, and all takeoffs were of the free-rolling type, eliminating the need for a ship's catapult. The aircraft were equipped with fuel tanks, rocket pods, and inert bombs, some of which were jettisoned in practice runs before aircraft recovery. Many vertical landings were carried out with the ship steaming at full speed. The trials also involved topside servicing of the aircraft, the use of elevators, and simulated maintenance in the hangar. As a result of these trials, the RAF was cleared to operate its GR1s from carriers. This was the first time such a clearance had ever been issued to an Air Force unit. In the following year, 1971, No. 1 Squadron took its Harriers aboard Ark Royale. None of the RAF pilots had ever flown from a ship before. In contrast to the other jet-lift aircraft, the entire Harrier family shares one distinctive feature in the cockpit, a nozzle selector lever. The cockpit itself is relatively simple, featuring a single curved box with two levers. One lever serves as the throttle, while the other is the nozzle lever, which is telescopic, spring-loaded, and controls the angle of the nozzles. The pilot can typically operate the nozzle lever without needing to glance down. To accelerate forward, the pilot pushes the nozzle selector lever forward along with the throttle. For short takeoffs, a predetermined speed is set, and the lever is moved to a preset stop, usually around 50 or 55 degrees. For vertical takeoff, or hover, the lever is pulled back to a vertical position at a fixed stop. When braking in air combat or for deceleration before landing, the lever is lifted over the VTO stop into the braking sector, with most pilots going straight to maximum braking. While the pilot can adjust the nozzle angle during air-to-air refueling, they typically rely on the throttle and air brake for such maneuvers. From the early days of service in 1969, RAF Harrier GR1 squadrons practiced refueling from Victor K-1A tankers. Little did anyone suspect how critical this practice would become 13 years later, allowing Harriers to fly extended distances of 4,500 miles and go directly into battle. In 1961, Hawker Aircraft was instructed to create a two-seater trainer for the P-1127. Although this project was initially cancelled, a two-seat Harrier was requested in 1965 and subsequently developed. The first Harrier T-4 took flight in April 1969. This variant was significantly longer than the single-seater and featured a larger tail, yet it retained full combat capabilities. The introduction of the Harrier T-4 debunked the notion that only experienced frontline pilots could operate Harriers. Given the nature of jet-lift aircraft, it was considered unwise to bring them anywhere near an airfield during wartime, as it would invite destruction. Instead, Harriers were often deployed to remote locations, particularly wooded areas. Appropriately, the first Harrier squadron was the RAF's No. 1, which lived up to its motto, "First in everything." They quickly explored dispersed operations from wooded areas, employing various weapons. However, in March 1970, the squadron traveled to RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus for an armament practice camp. They conducted numerous sorties using live ordnance, including cluster bomb dispensers, rockets, and 30mm cannons, all of which were employed effectively. Despite its small size, the Harrier was discovered to be highly potent and boasted unexpected assets such as agility and relative invisibility. By 1971, Harriers were in service with the 1st Squadron of the U.S. Marine Corps, designated AV-8A. These aircraft were even simpler than their RAF counterparts, but were equipped with the AIM-9 Sidewinder air-to-air missile. This enabled the AV-8A to fly rapid reaction air defense missions, though of course only under day visual conditions. During tests, an AV-8A formated behind the USAF KC-135 in order to fly through a dense spray of water. This test, similar to the one carried out in England with an RAF Harrier, was to check proper operation of the engine and airframe in heavy rain or severe icing conditions. Like other Harriers, the Marine Corps AV-8A can have a bolt-on in-flight refueling probe. This enables the aircraft to make for long ferrying flights, refueled by such tankers as the KC-130, KA-6D, or A-4 with a body pack. The AV-8As also routinely operated from ships such as the U.S. Navy assault vessel Raleigh. The Marine AV-8As also operated from the much bigger Tarawa class of amphibious warfare transports. Unlike all other fast jets, the Harriers do not need a larger deck. One Harrier, assembled from parts freely donated by the suppliers and with appropriate registration VTOL, is the British Aerospace Demonstrator. One of the users of the AV-8A is Spain's naval aviation. Their aircraft are called the VA-1 Matadors, the trainer being the VAE-1. The Matadors equipped Squadron 008, based at Rota, Spain, also operates from Spain's two carriers. A notable feature of the Matador is the large ratio antenna mounted atop the fuselage, which facilitates communication between the pilots and surface vessels and helicopters. At that time, Spain's Matador fleet consisted of 11 single-seat Matadors and a pair of two-seat trainer versions. Following the cancellation of the Hawker P-1154 jet-lift aircraft, a supersonic counterpart to the Harrier, the Royal Navy found itself without fixed-wing air power except for the massive Phantom FG-1, which required a lengthy takeoff run and cannot operate at sea except from large carriers. However, the British government cancelled these large carriers in 1966, suggesting that seagoing air power should be the responsibility of the RAF alone. This decision left the Royal Navy devoid of fixed-wing fighters or ground attack aircraft of its own. The Harrier's ability to operate from small decks sparked a novel concept of seagoing air power. The outcome of this concept was the Sea Harrier, which featured a new front end with a multi-mode radar, an updated cockpit, and other enhancements. It was designated as FRS-1, signifying its roles in fighter reconnaissance and strike missions. The Sea Harrier, also known as the Sea Harrier, was considered one of the world's most versatile combat aircraft for its time. It can operate without the need for a conventional airfield or aircraft carrier, but its performance is enhanced by the addition of a ski jump launching ramp. Ski jump ramps were initially tested on shore, on an airfield, and they can curve upwards at angles of up to 12 degrees. These ramps improve safety during takeoff and enable an additional 2,500 pounds of warload to be carried for the same short run. Alternatively, the takeoff run can be reduced by 60% while maintaining a fixed weight. Trials involving two-seater and Sea Harriers began in 1977.
Doug Taylor came along and he said, what we want is a ski jump, this curved ramp on the front. If we put a curved ramp there, such that the exit angle from that ramp, no matter how bowed down the ship is still upwards. You're going away from the water, isn't that what every pilot's trying to do? And I mean, it's such a simple idea. It was August 1977 when we had the first trial ski jump built for us at the Royal Aircraft Establishment at Bedford. It produced not only this better performance in terms of the weight you could lift in rough water, and it was rough down at the Falklands at times, but it also provided more safety for the pilot.
The use of ski jump ramps wasn't initially considered during the design of the Royal Navy's 3 Invincible-class vessels. However, HMS Ark Royal was later fitted with a ski jump ramp set to the optimum angle, while her sister ships, Invincible and Illustrious, had their ramps set at a 7-degree angle. Sea Harriers are capable of carrying 5,000 pounds of weapons on 5 stations. The FRS-1's combat weaponry includes Sidewinder missiles and 2 30mm cannons. Fully loaded Sea Harriers are launched without the need for a catapult and are recovered without arrestor wires. The 2 30mm Aiden cannons are housed in separate pods beneath the fuselage, while additional fuel tanks are attached to the inner wing hardpoints. Sidewinder air-to-air missiles are carried on the outer wing pylons. After being updated to Sea Harrier FRS-2s, they were equipped to carry the powerful Sea Eagle anti-ship missile with a range of at least 70 miles. The Sea Eagle is propelled by a small turbojet engine and features an active radar in its nose, enabling it to locate and target ships in any weather condition while skimming the waves at near the speed of sound. The Sea Eagle could cripple any warship except for the biggest carriers. Another Sea Harrier weapon is the 2-inch rocket, smaller than that fired by the RAF, but salvo in larger numbers, 36 from each launcher. These high-velocity rockets were also fired from RAF Harriers GR3s during the Falklands campaign and were found highly effective. Rippling away 72 of them gave several seconds of virtually continuous firepower with high accuracy. Sea Harriers frequently practiced firing 2-inch rockets against toad splash targets. Sea Harriers also frequently practiced the simulated or real Sidewinder firings. At that time, short-medium-range air-to-air Sidewinders could knock down targets up to 8 miles away. Sea Harriers are capable of performing toss bombing or horizontal laydown bombing. They are also equipped with the BL-755 cluster bomber dispenser, which was effectively used during the Falklands campaign by both Sea Harriers and RAF Harriers. In 1988, the first upgraded Sea Harrier FRS-2s were introduced, featuring a larger and more powerful Blue Vixen radar, which replaced the earlier Blue Fox radar. This radar had full lockdown and shoot-down capability, and was compatible with the new American AIM-120 AMRAAM missile. The FRS-2 also featured a longer rear fuselage and underwent substantial internal revisions to enhance mission effectiveness, particularly in adverse weather conditions or against hostile countermeasures. Despite these upgrades, the FRS-2 retained the same compact size as the FRS-1, making it one of the smallest combat aircraft in the modern world at that time. This compact size contrasts with the Sea Harrier's versatility and demonstrated combat effectiveness. During the Falklands campaign, they achieved at least 23 air-to-air victories and possibly as many as 28, even while operating in often atrocious blizzard conditions. India was the first overseas customer for the Sea Harrier, placing both orders for single-seat Mark 51s and two-seat Mark 60s. Indian Navy squadrons operate from the carriers Vikrant and Virat. In the RAF, the GR-1 Harriers from 1969 were upgraded in terms of engine power and fitted with thimble noses containing laser rangers and marked target seekers, resulting in the GR-3 variant. The training unit for GR-3s is number 233 Operational Conversion Unit. All RAF Harrier pilots are trained to be proficient with the SNEB 68mm rocket, which has been proven effective against all but the heaviest frontal armor of the modern battle tanks in that era. On the Rangers, GR-3 pilots consistently achieve good results with these unguided weapons, thanks to the inertial platform Laser Ranger weapon aiming computer and heads-up display. Turnaround operations at RAF Wittering, often referred to as the home of the Harrier, are fast and efficient. Aircraft may need to be refueled and rearmed in preparation for another sortie. The SNEB rockets are fired through the aerodynamic cowling on the front of the pods and must be replaced after each mission. Actual practice with live weapons is considered irreplaceable. In April 1982, the Argentine invasion of the Falklands led to the British government's rapid organization of Operation Corporate to recover the islands. The new light carrier, Invincible, and the much larger Hermes sailed from Portsmouth with all available Sea Harriers. These aircraft engaged in battles with a much larger number of enemy aircraft, including Skyhawks, Mirages, Daggers, and others. The Sea Harrier roundels were repainted as the low-visibility B-type, without any white areas. The aircraft were given a grey dull finish, which was later replaced by a lighter color they called barley grey. Full battle maintenance was conducted on the hangar decks, ensuring that every aircraft was ready for service. The ships were loaded with bombs, BL-755 dispensers, rockets, tanks, and, for escort and interception duties, sidewinders. Pre-flight inspection by the pilots, about to go into action for the first time, took on a new significance.
Okay, calling stone clear on Sea Harrier 2-3, after it, flying to AV-8B Harrier, flying to close up Sea Harrier 2-3.
The first operations were flown from about 90 miles east of the islands. The first combat mission was a bombing and strafing attack on Stanley Airfield, at dawn on May the 1st.
Intenso.
Viewed from Port Stanley, the Harriers encountered heavy fire from guns of all calibers, and from Roland and Tiger Cat surface-to-air missiles. The target's airfield across the bay received several hits.
Estaría en llamas en este momento. Otro avión más. Misiles nuestros se dirigen en busca del avión enemigo. Está tirando ahí al buque. Está tirando al buque, Fernando.
During the Falklands campaign, the first operation involved 28 Sea Harriers flying 2,197 sorties, with all Sea Harriers returning safely to the carrier. Each aircraft had to make a challenging landing, often in virtually zero visibility. Only one Sea Harrier took hit from a small caliber shell in its fin, and it was back in the air the next day. A night attack by a lone RAF Vulcan bomber resulted in one bomb hitting the runway, rendering it unusable for a large number of Argentine jets. Subsequent Sea Harrier strikes placed the occupying Argentine forces on the defensive, causing both physical and moral damage. The RAF later joined the conflict with the GR-3s, and a few decades later are equipping squadrons with the second-generation Harrier II, known as the GR-5. Further upgrades with night and all-weather equipment will result in the GR-7. The GR-5 features a long-span wing made of carbon fiber, holding 1.5 times as much fuel as earlier Harriers and providing 11 weapon stations, including 4 under each wing. The GR-5 is shown carrying BL-755 cluster bomblet dispensers, but is still well below its weight limit of 9,200 pounds. All weapon trials for the GR-5 were highly successful, offering pilots a completely new experience.
There are two types of Harrier wing that have flown and have gone into service. One, a 200 square foot area metal wing, and the other a 230 square foot plastic wing. This wing was made by McDonnell Douglas, and it represents the very latest in technology in terms of strong structures and light structures. If you think of the way they make Formula One motor cars these days, these carbon fibre, graphite epoxy resins are used all the time for their strength instead of metals. Firstly, and very obviously, the plastic wing has got these much larger flaps, and they help you lift off the much greater bomb load that the larger wing can carry. The bomb load, you see, isn't just a case of weight, it's the number of munitions you've got. And so this wing here has got 4 pylons on each wing. So it's 8 wing-borne pylons, as well as the 3 on the fuselage. Whereas the Harrier I wing has only got 2 pylons per wing. And so you've got only a total of 4 pylons on your wings on the Harrier I. They also asked us to make the airplane so as it would fly from narrower roads. Well, the wheels that are on the wingtip, they're over 20 feet apart. And you can hardly wander along a road with your main wheels on the road and your little kiddie wheels in the ditch, can you? You don't mind having your outriggers on the road and your wing tips over the ditch. That's all right. So we move the outriggers in. Just as simple as that.
The Harrier II program originated with the AV-8B prototype flown in November 1978. It introduced a new high-lift wing and numerous changes based on a deeper understanding of jet STOVL gained during 10 years of Harrier combat duty. British Aerospace became a minor participant, and control of the program shifted to the United States due to the British government's decision to not collaborate. The program also led to the creation of a new trainer version, the TAV-8B, featuring deeply stepped tandem cockpits. A production TAV-8B visited England in 1988, though normally they're seen only at Cherry Point, North Carolina. The new trainer, with deeply stepped with tandem cockpits, has the same mean, purposeful look as the single-seat Harrier IIs. The cockpit is totally new compared to the 1960s vintage Harriers. The RAF versions have thicker canopy moldings due to bird strikes at full throttle at low altitudes over the UK and Germany. One of the later developed features on the Harrier II is the longer front engine nozzle design for increased thrust. The outrigger landing gears are positioned halfway to the wingtips instead of at the tips, providing extra pylons for sidewinders in the RAF GR5s. The view from the AV-8B and TAV-8B is excellent, with a bulged-out canopy and frameless windscreen. U.S. Marine Corps aircraft use stencil ejection seats, while RAF GR5s are equipped with Martin Baker Mark 12 seats. The TAV-8B has a longer vertical tail and can carry most of the weapons carried by the single-seaters. The AV-8Bs entered Marine Corps service in October 1983, over 5 years ahead of regular squadron service by the GR5. The Marines' basic missions included support beach assaults, and they practiced various forms of dive attacks, lay-down bombing, rocket firing, and strafing with guns in support of amphibious operations. To conduct operations inland, AV-8Bs utilize hides on land, preferably in wooded areas. North Carolina, where much of the training was centered, offered numerous suitable locations. The smaller track between the outer gears made it easier to taxi on narrow paths, and operations weighing up to the maximum of 31,000 pounds have been flown from dirt roads. In this case, a paved highway is used to minimize flying debris and dust. Rolling vertical landings allow the aircraft to move ahead of any debris that might be ingested by the engine during a completely vertical landing. Meanwhile, Sea Harriers of the Royal Navy's No. 899 Squadron in Britain often practice and refine their display routines. 20 years after it entered in service, and nearly 30 years after the first hover of the P-1127, the Harrier was still a surefire showstopper, which usually generated spontaneous applause.
On April 17, 2018, Flight 1380, a Southwest Airlines Boeing 737 was climbing out of New York en route to Dallas. 20 minutes after takeoff at 32,000 feet, the airplane's engine exploded. Debris from the engine damaged the wing and the fuselage and shattered a window, causing rapid decompression of the cabin. The aircraft snapped left, rolling to 40 degrees before the pilots regained control. The flight crew initiated an emergency descent, the captain flying the airplane and the first officer reading off the emergency checklist. For the next 40 minutes, they managed a crippled airplane that was vibrating badly and increasingly difficult to control, finally landing it safely at Philadelphia International Airport. Several passengers were injured by debris, but only one passenger died after being sucked partway out of the broken window. The Southwest captain who landed that plane was Tammy Joe Schultz, a former U.S. Navy pilot. Southwest Airlines officials later commended, quote, her actions, calm demeanor, and competence during the emergency, end quote. U.S. Secretary of Transportation Elaine Chao had praised for, quote, the pilots who safely landed the aircraft and the crew and fellow passengers who provided support and care for the injured, preventing what could have been far worse, end quote. The media called Captain Schultz a hero with nerves of steel. It was not the first time that Tammy Joe Schultz had faced and overcome a challenge. As one of the first women to fly fighter jets for the Navy, she had overcome barriers, setbacks, and people who doubted her. As a high school senior, Tammy Jo Bonnell asked about a career in flying and was told that there were no professional women pilots. While in college, she applied to the Air Force but was turned down. During graduate school, she applied to the Navy. She was dismissed as a girl pilot that the Navy didn't need. But she was determined to try one more time, and she was finally accepted into the Navy's flight school, where she earned her wings in the T-34 Mentor. Tammy Jo served as a flight instructor in the T-2 Buckeye and qualified in the A-7 Corsair II. When her squadron transitioned from the Prowler to the F-A-18 Hornets, Tammy Jo became one of the first women in the Navy to qualify in that frontline combat aircraft. The F-A-18 Hornet was designed for both air-to-air and air-to-ground combat. Its avionics, cockpit displays, and flight characteristics make it a very versatile aircraft. It can operate from an aircraft carrier and can carry a wide variety of weapons. Operated by the U.S. Navy and Marines and by several foreign allies, the F-A-18 was also flown by the Navy's Blue Angels flight demonstration team. At the time of Desert Storm, U.S. military policy prevented women from flying in combat, so Tammy Jo flew as an instructor aggressor pilot, training other naval aviators. Following her active duty, Tammy Jo was promoted to lieutenant commander and assigned to the Navy Reserves, where she flew F-A-18s. She retired from the Navy with Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medals, a National Defense Service Medal, and a Marksmanship Medal. She married Dean Schultz, a fellow naval aviator, and the two of them joined Southwest Airlines as pilots. On the day the 737's engine exploded, Tammy Jo hadn't expected to be in the cockpit. She had traded schedules with her husband for that flight. After retiring from Southwest Airlines, Tammy Jo wrote about her experiences and the challenges and accomplishments of her flying career. Her book is called Nerves of Steel: How I Followed My Dreams, Earned My Wings, and Faced My Greatest Challenge. It is less about her heroism on Flight 1380 and more about the experiences that forged the competence and cool head that made her a hero to 148 passengers and crew. Today, women occupy a growing number of seats in the cockpits of commercial airliners and U.S. military aircraft. Many of them were inspired by women like Tammy Joe Schultz, pioneers who were told that girls don't become pilots, but who followed their dreams, overcame the challenges, and earned their wings.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ed McElhenney. If you were here last year, you might remember my face. I'm a year older. I've got hearing aids now, and I just replaced my right knee. So I probably won't be standing the entire show today. But it's not my show. It's this lady's show over here. You just saw the introduction. I'm honored to be here, to be the rudder that steers the ship, so to speak. And I could introduce her as Lieutenant Commander Schultz. I could introduce her as Captain Schultz, but instead I introduce her as my friend Tammy Jo. And Tammy Jo, thank you so much for being here. And the airplanes that are here, by the way, one is obviously the F-18. This is a Growler, F-18G, and I'm going to say my thank yous right up front. These folks that are sitting here in these green suits, they came from Whidbey Island, Washington, and it's their airplane. So thank you, guys and girls, for providing that airplane. And the next two people over there, Tim and Claire Knudsen, that's their N3N. And no, Tammy Jo didn't start her Navy career in the N3N. No, she didn't. But it's their airplane. And that young lady there with a microphone in her hand, she's the one who flew it in here, 21 years old, and she's been flying it for 3 years. And what it does is get it back to where we really want to talk about women in aviation, first of all. The reason we're here today, and I'll just tell you right now, that Connie and I were watching the Super Bowl this year, and I'm sure a lot of you watched the Super Bowl. And did you see the flyby? You know, we always enjoy the Star Spangled Banner and then the flyby afterwards. Anybody remember what was in the flyby? Oh yeah, okay. F-35 was flight lead. You had 2 Super Hornets on the wing, and you had a Growler in trail, okay? I said, hey, that's pretty cool. Okay, they don't show it very long, but then they had some cockpit views. And in the cockpit views, all of a sudden I'm going, wow, that's a girl, and that's a girl, and that's a girl, and that's a girl. They were all females flying these fighters. And I'm, you know, yeah, I was at first taken aback. I'm going, come on, you know, we fly these things too. Why not at least have one guy in there? But then they brought up the fact that, hey, the reason they were doing that was because it was the 50th year that female aviators were allowed to fly Navy airplanes. So it was the 50th anniversary. And I sat there and I said, that's good. I get it. Wonderful. And then Connie and I looked at each other and said, okay, do we know any female Navy aviators? And we said, yes, we do. And so a couple phone calls, and the next thing you know, Tammy Jo says, yes, indeed. I would be pleased and happy to be part of this program. So that's how we got to where we are. So it's going to be concentrated more on female Navy aviators. And I'll just say right now, first of all, and I do this on every presentation, military veterans, active, retired, please stand. We want to say thank you. Thank you for your service. And the follow-on to that, of course, is how about female aviators? How many female aviators do we have in the audience out there today? Can we see those who, please stand if you're a female aviator, okay? We've got a few. You are in, yes you are. You gotta be kidding me. You're in the back seat of that thing. So anyway, that's why we're here today, and Tammy Jo can help me out a little bit on this because, hey, you know, ladies flew these airplanes way back when, the Wasps, back in the 40s. And yeah, feel free to chime in anytime, but I'll turn a little bit over to Tammy Jo right now.
Right. One of the things that I've heard this year, because it's the 50th year of celebrating 50 years of women flying in the military. The Navy was first. Sorry.
You're right. I agree.
It's the Air Force versus Navy today. But often I hear, well, but the Wasps were first. And truly, we do stand on the shoulders of the Wasp if you're a female aviator in the military because they flew military aircraft. However, they were not in the military. They bought their own uniforms. They designed, and Jacqueline Cochran made their wings. They paid board and room. They had no medical. If somebody was killed in the line of duty, which did happen, the girls pitched together to pay for either transportation of the body home or the funeral. So the military itself, those ladies wore wings of silver, and in the Navy in 1973 they opened it up for women to fly, and the wings of gold were open to women.
And the missions truly back then, I mean, they did ferry missions, they did test missions, they got shot at, they towed banners, you know, and if you don't know, you know, they would tow a banner for gunnery practice and stuff like that. High altitude stuff, they did a lot of dangerous stuff, yet they, again, still, hey, couldn't be in the military, and that was the way it was.
Right, and it's interesting to me because not only did they fly, which I think we owe them a solemn but happy moment of gratitude for that, but so many of them went on to do things like Betty Green, who you don't hear very often about the WASP named Betty Green, but if you're familiar with Mission Aviation Fellowship, she was their first pilot. It was her vision before she even went into the WASPs to use aviation to break that isolation of people with medical, education, and spiritual help. So that's an organization that is around the world and alive today. And whenever we talk about towing banners, one of her stories was when she towed the banner, they initially shot at her aircraft until her male instructor got on the horn and said, "Hey, the banner." And so the mortars quit exploding by the cockpit and near the aircraft, and they started to the banner. So it was sometimes more dangerous than necessary.
So anyway, that's how it started, and then we got into 1973, and Tammy Jo sat there and said, "Hey, I want to do this." And yeah, unfortunately, the United States Air Force said no. And yeah, there's more to that story, I'm sure, also.
Right. Well, and to begin with the ladies who started in 1973, there were some, 3 of the ladies were already in OCS, going through Officer Candidate School. So they said, well, let's see if any of those ladies are interested. So Judy, Jane, and Barbara began, they finished their OCS, and then 3 other ladies, Mary, Rosemary Mariner, who was my skipper in the Navy, and Joellen. Mm-hmm. So the first 3, they gave props, and the last 3, they gave helos, but Rosemary dug in her heels and said, nope, I came with my commercial and my college at 19, I want jets. And so that was the original 6.
Wow. And Rosemary ended up being a former commander of yours, correct?
Right. She was the first woman to take command of an aviation squadron in the U.S.
Okay.
And VAQ-34. It was commissioned during Reagan's time as president, and so he was increasing the Navy not only by ships but by aircraft. And so our mission was to study Russian, Chinese, and French weapons and tactics, and then employ those against the fleet. And it ran from Top Gun students, other squadrons, single ships, to entire carrier group workups.
Okay, and just to show that I've done my homework, VAQ, you know, you'll hear her talk about VAQ, and that's what these folks are out of too. They're out of a VAQ squadron. The V stands for fixed wing, okay,
Right.
the A stands for attack, okay, and the Q stands for electronic, okay? So they're jammers, basically. That's what this airplane is designed to do, and that's what that squadron was designed to do. It was a support squadron, if you will, but that was the VAQ that, and you were a member of that that squadron also.
Right, and to be honest, I don't know all of the Growler mission, but we did more than jam. We simulated, and so I think maybe, do you all do simulations as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that mission is still alive today. It just transferred from that small VAQ 33 and 34 sister squadrons to the Growler community today.
All right, how about a quick synopsis of your career? Okay, you obviously started out in the T-34 and then worked your way up.
Right. And actually, I mean, just as a real quick review, for those that might be listening or younger ears that think, I don't know how to get into a cockpit. And I saw the jets overhead our ranch there in southern New Mexico, and
I was one of them, by the way. I was a T-38. That was fighter lead-in training at Holloman, New Mexico. And believe it or not, that time frame, that was I was probably up there.
Right, and I'll be sending you the bill for all the broken windows later, because it wasn't until I was in the Navy later and had done some air-to-air that I realized there really was no reason for those guys to go scorching by our ranch, breaking the sound barrier and all our windows at 500 feet or so. There's not a lot of air-to-air that happens at that altitude.
It was fun. Come on.
Mm-hmm. We know what kind of a rule breaker you are. But so seeing this air show overhead as they anchored their dogfighting practice over our hay barn, I mentioned to my folks, you know what? I think that's what I'd like to do. And my mom came back with, Tammy, though, those people are smart. She always had a wonderful, frank way about her. It still does. And so I started reading books about airplanes and pilots, and read the book Jungle Pilot. Nate Saint was the pilot in that, an MAF pilot. And he'd gotten his start in the military for no money down, which was the amount I had. And so that kind of just opened the doors for me, and I could see this faint footpath emerging from barnyard to cockpit. And so that's the path I followed. And everybody shut their doors. At that time, it was 1983 by the time I got my college degree. And the Air Force said no 3 times and don't come back. And then the Army was polite, listened, and said, you are not a fit for us. So I moved on to the Navy. And truthfully, it is a good lesson. And sometimes those doors that are shut are meant to be shut, because the Navy was the only branch at that time that was allowing women to fly tactical aircraft in tactical missions, and the combat exclusion policy was solidly in place. It wasn't even being considered to be lifted, but the Navy had the attitude that if it's not combat, go for it. And so that's why I got to fly A7s, and then Rosemary Mariner, who was in the first class, and our skipper, when they started considering lifting the combat exclusion policy, sent us to A7 weapons, 2 of us. But I started in the T-34, back to your question, I didn't forget. The T-34, and then on to the, and I do have to stop and just say, I arrived without hardly knowing what an aileron was. So on the first flight, my instructor, who was a Marine, absolutely, United States Marine Corps, I should say. Then he said, I'm going to demo most of this, just pay close attention. So I did. He did the departure, showed me how to maneuver within the MOA via beaches, buildings, things like that. And then he said, let's go do some touch and goes at the outlying field. Let's just do a downwind entry. And it was my first real helmet fire, because I thought, I have no idea what he's talking about, a downwind entry. I'd studied the brake, I knew the brake, but he was demoing, so I thought, well, I'll just write down what he does. And he rolled inverted, pulled down, rolled upright, on altitude, airspeed, and the downwind. So I just drew what I thought it looked like and learned how to land and went back, did the break. The next day I said, all right, Bonnell, show me that you listened. And so we did all the things that we did the day before, and he said, all right, let's go do some touch and goes. So we're about the same place we were the day before, and I got as close as I could. I rolled inverted, pulled down. There was, well, I know Marines don't scream, but he was using his excited voice. And the beating of fists on the canopy let me know that he wasn't as buckled in for my downwind entry as I had been for his. So it was a debrief item, and I learned what the downwind entry was. But on to T2s. I recovered from that.
By the way, the T2, if you look over our shoulder here to the left, there's a T2 Buckeye right there. That's what she's about to talk about.
Right. That it has the name, the guppy, by those who fly it, just because it looks like that fierce little fish. But it is a sturdy jet, straight wing, tip tank, so it's very, very stable. But it was our first jet to bring aboard the boat. This was pre-Top Gun 1, so we didn't have all the film footage of the carrier deck or the Kenny Loggins music to inspire us as we went out. And we're trying to sneak a peek at the carrier, at the Lexington, as we're in 4-plane formation, threatened with death if we made the airplane, the formation look bad. So that was certainly fun. They send you out there, and I'm sure it's probably the same, but every stage of flight that we had learned so far, we always had an instructor. And then you go to do your carrier landings, you practice on the field, but the first time you go see the boat, you're solo. And every time as a student, they told us they couldn't pay anybody enough to get in their backseat. But they had figured out that they need your decision loop very tight around the carrier. It's a dynamic area. They don't need you thinking about what your instructor is thinking about what you should do. They just need you thinking about what you should do. And my first launch, they had told us, okay, don't show us the planned form of your T2, rise slowly and don't stall out. And so, especially being the only girl in my squadron, which happened the first 4 squadrons, I was the only female there. So I was determined. I was not going to look like a sissy. So as I got shot off, I just kept going. 60 feet above the water. Finally, they said, Bonnell, pull up. And when I got back, my instructor had written in the book, check intake for mackerel. So on to the A4. And we don't have an A4 here, but I bet there's one on the line someplace. It's anybody who's flown the A4 loves it. It was light attack, pulled back from the fleet for training, and so we traded in the stable wings and tip tanks for the very delta wings and the maneuverability to do all the fleet exercises that we would plan to see in the future, low levels, bombing, strafing, air-to-air, and more carrier. Oh, and then A7, I talked a little bit about that.
But before, A7 was operational. I mean, that was when you were in VA.
Right.
But before that, didn't you do the T2 as we used to call them FAPEs. So was it as a surgrad? Was that what you were?
I have to say, the Navy made it a good deal. I don't know that the Air Force still has come around to that. But the Navy, being a surgrad, whenever you got your wings, then you had to have a good grade average, and the skipper has to ask for you. And so I had a great skipper, Commander Grant, in T2s, and I went back to instruct for him. He was even more fun to instruct for than to be a student in his squadron. And I instructed in T2s, had a change of command.
But before you go there, you instructed in the T2. Isn't one of your students in the T2 here too?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yes, I suppose he is. Right there.
Where's Dean? Yeah. By the way, that's Dean. That's Tammy Joe's husband, and I found this out today that Dean was one of Tammy Joe's students in the T2 Buckeyes.
I'm not going to leave it there, Ed. I have to tell you, I wasn't his instructor, and he called saying he couldn't find a cross-country instructor, and he needed one. So I said, well, do
You
you
felt
have
sorry
your-"
for him.
Right. There were 3 other, there was a total of 4 airplanes going. The night before, everybody else canceled. And I've always been suspicious of that. But
Well done, Dean. Well done. That's all I can say.
and he was charming, but I thought, you know what? I'm grading him. He needs to be charming. But he has been charming for the last 35 years.
All right. Sorry to interrupt. You can continue your story now. But yeah, Dean Schultz is, go ahead. Dean, stand up, wave at everybody. That's another Southwest guy, another Hornet guy. Yep, another veteran. So thanks for being here.
So I did instruct for a couple of years. I had a change of command in the middle of that. I had gotten my advanced quals as an instructor, teaching carrier landings, and then I had just finishing up my guns qual. And the new skipper said, "Oh no, I will not have a woman teaching weapons in my squadron." So I got pulled from that and sent to teach out of control flight. And
in the T2. This is in the T2
in the
now.
T2, yes. And while it was not my choice, and rather punitively assigned, it turned out to be some of the best training that I ever had. It's true, you don't know a subject till you teach it. And we had more than spins. One day you had asked me about, one day we had a asymmetrical transfer of fuel in our tip tank, and they were old enough at the time that the float valve that you can see, the plexiglass was so clouded we really couldn't see the ball very well. So in flight, we didn't realize that when we did our first stall, we had 1 empty tip tank and 1 full. So that made for not a spin, but a spiral. And at that time, the T2 Buckeye didn't have spiral recovery technique in the NATOPS. They'd done it at test pilot school by just seeing how can we make this thing spiral. But we didn't have any procedures to get out. And so my student, it was supposed to be just a stall, and then it whips around. And if you're not familiar, a spin is kind of a maple leaf going around sideways, flat at about 90 knots, oscillating. But a spiral is a drill bit, and it gets faster and faster. And the student, I took the controls. Usually I waited till 18,000 feet, starting at 30. But this one I just took immediately. And he started with 28, 27, 26, 27. And by the time we were at 10, it was just a squeak. And but we did. I was getting married in just a couple of months, and I remember thinking, you know, adrenaline gives you that slow down of time just because it accelerates your thought process. And I just remember thinking, I will be a Godzilla bride. This is going to be awful. Because ejecting is kind of a messy, bruisey situation. And so I tried all the different combinations I could think of. And at 5,000 feet, we wobbled into control and pulled out. And
wow.
I was afraid he wouldn't go back and do the flight again, the student, because it was not an enjoyable ride. So we went up and finished the flight. And he kissed the ground when we got back, unashamedly.
Wow. Yeah, I've been out of control several times. Our out of control altitude was 10,000 feet. If you're out of control passing 10,000 feet, you're out of there. And the fact that you stayed with it as long as you did, yeah, and figured out how to, hey, make that thing recover. And I guess it was after the fact, you know, when you said, hey, the airplane did this, we don't know why, and that's when they figured out, oh, by the way, you know, there was a transfer problem, and yeah, that's what made it do what it did.
Right. It was kind of funny, to me, it was kind of funny in that we went back and said, we had a spiral. And the skipper said, no, you didn't. And I said, no, we really, and we described it. And he turns to my student, he goes, did you really have a spiral? And so we called TPS and found out, you know, what were the procedures to get out of it, which I memorized.
How about transitioning to the F-18? Was that a pretty big transition?
You know, it was interesting because I think Rosemary, Captain Mariner, sending Pam Lyons and I ahead to do the A7 weapons training with the fleet-bound pilots before the combat exclusion policy was lifted. You know, operating an aircraft in its most dynamic performance arena really helps prepare you for anything. It broadens your aviation base. So going to the Hornet was a big jump in responsiveness as well as mission, because A7s, a face only a mother could love, but great low-level aircraft, great attack. It had carried more Mike than the Hornet, and things like that. But the responsiveness and being able to do more air-to-air came along with going to the Hornet. And Pam and I were the first to go through the RAG. It hadn't been open to women before, and there were some really great attitudes to meet us, and there were some really not great attitudes to meet us. And it's really always made me come away from that whole idea of transparency with a new perspective. I think it's a little like yoga pants, not for everybody.
How about, I got to ask the question, when I transitioned to the F-16, they made all of our instructors at that point go down to the spin dryer, the centrifuge.
Right.
Was that a requirement for you guys and
Sure.
girls, when you went through the F-18 school?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes, and we've hopefully taken any of those images out of the public domain.
I know, it's not pretty.
It's not pretty.
I've got one too. But we did have some people who really struggled, and I got to say, from a personal standpoint, we put the first female F-16 pilot through our guard school in Wichita. Jackie Parker was her name, and she wasn't a big girl, but she had a few issues with G loadings. I mean, she wasn't the best, she wasn't the worst, but she learned to cope. I mean, we all had G suits and stuff like that. But for our F-16, it was a 9G airplane. The Hornet's what, a 7.3? I can't remember. Somewhere.
I think 7.8.
Okay, 7.8. Okay, but still, that's a lot of G's. And yeah, and she, like I said, she graduated and did fine. But I was just wondering, in air-to-air combat, was ever a factor for you?
It wasn't, but it's kind of, to me, I think it's a little like air sickness. Some people have a tendency for it, some people don't. Some people have an affinity for withstanding G's, some don't. I don't think it's a male-female issue. I think it's person-person. We did find that, like, after a break, after we'd gone on leave or Christmas, and we get in, we wouldn't go right to 7 again. Yeah. You give yourself a flight or two to get, I'd say, G buffed up for it, and then you're on.
I was the same way. I was flying for the airlines at the time, and if I had a international flight, and it was a 3-day trip, hey, that next day after I got home, I wouldn't fly a high G flight. I mean, yeah, it was right. Like, hey, at least take a day off, and yeah.
How to grow delicious tomatoes. Step 1. Feed them while watering with Miracle-Gro liquid feed. That's it. Miracle-Gro. All you need to know to grow.
All right, so we've gone from the T-34 to the T-2 to the A-7 to the F-18, and now I got to say, since we're getting close on time, let's go to the Southwest thing. Got hired by Southwest, and away you went. Easy, hard? Did they accept you right away? Of course, we've got. Where's Connie back there? Yeah, if you didn't know, Connie, let's see, third female hired by Delta Airlines in 1978. It was probably a little easier for you, but was there difficulty in getting hired as a female by Southwest?
I don't know that the difficulty was really in getting hired. It was surviving sometimes.
Okay.
But I have to mention the good guys, because there were always good guys. I feel like God always provided people like Jerry Bradley, who's in the crew here, and Jim Rice, who I believe is here as well. And so I always had some incredible men as mentors and leaders, and it was a turbulent time, I would say, just because nobody deals with change well. We all have something about the way things used to be that we liked. So there was a big change. Aviation is a tight community. Women going into combat didn't set well, even in a commercial cockpit. With some folks, even though I don't rule Congress, I had nothing to do with it. That was something I heard a lot about. Then there was crew resource management that had come on the scene, and that meant we were going to utilize both pilots in the cockpit. There was no more sky gods. Captains now had a Magna Carta. They had to, be a team player. And so there were some that had grown up in the idea of I am finally a sky god and I'm holding on to it. That it was a little difficult, but those things, time marches on, and I think everybody learned.
How about becoming a captain? How long were you a first officer before you turned into a captain?
I was the first officer for 5 years. I had our second baby, took some extra time off with the Marshal, and then went back and was a captain for 20.
Okay. And I got to bring up the fact that Marshall is their son. He can't be here today. You knew this was coming, okay? You started it with the Air Force Navy thing. So
it's
anyway,
fine.
Their son graduated from the United States Air Force Academy last year, okay?
We asked him, Dean and I are both Navy pilots, we said, Marshall, is this how a good son rebels? He said, I'm bringing honor back to the family name.
And oh, by the way, one of the Growler girls over there is a United States Naval Academy graduate, by the way.
Thank you.
So she's
nice to be represented.
And yeah, Marshall's right now, what, T6 school, flying formation?
T6
is
learning to fly close
in
to other people.
Yeah. All right, so now we're into the southwest side of things a little bit, and boy, I don't want to go through the whole story, and I will just compliment you on your actions, your crew's actions, I should say, because as well we know, it's not just Tammy Joe that did it. It's Tammy Joe, it's the first officer, it's the flight attendants in the back who helped out, and yeah, launched out of LaGuardia, headed to Dallas, as I remember, and all of a sudden, bang. And I can sit there, as a former airline guy, I don't know how many times I was in simulator training, the instructor goes, boom, he hits the side of the simulator, an engine rolls back, hey, you hear a hissing sound, hey, O2 mask got, and you do the, what do they call it, immediate action items and all that kind of stuff. But that's what she was trained to do, and she did it extremely, extremely well, and I compliment you on that. And yeah, I'll turn it over and just say, hey, things that you want to bring out to the crowd that you think is important.
Sure. Well, as Ed said, aviation, no matter how many seats in the airplane, is never a solo sport. And I had an incredible crew. Darren Elliser was my first officer. My flight attendants were Rachel Fernheimer, Catherine Sandoval, and Shanique Mallory. And I say their names slowly because it's important. They were a huge part of the success of that day. And we were headed from from New York to Dallas, full of passengers, even one on the jump seat, and then heavy with fuel, about 33,000 feet. We heard that bang, but instead of the bang and the engine rolling back, we heard the bang, the engine rolled back, did a snap roll, pitch over, and skidded. And so the bang turned into a shudder and a roar rather than calming down, and we got control of the aircraft and tried to slow down some of the shuddering by just slowing the aircraft down. The shuddering that came on was enough that we couldn't focus our eyes on instruments or checklists, and then there was smoke that had been pulled into the cockpit from the explosion, and then a condensation cloud from the rapid depressurization, since we were close to 33,000 feet. And the shuddering, we found out later, came from the damage. The engine, whenever the number 13 blade had severed near the hub and the dovetail, it had helixed forward and created a sonic boom inside of the engine, which that's actually what did the damage, not the blade itself. But that kind of peeled the engine cowling back like a banana peel, and the small pieces tore chunks out of the leading edge of the wing and different parts of the fuselage and the tail. One rather large chunk, one of the buckles from underneath the cowling, struck right in front of the 14th row window, and so that's what took out that window. And the shuddering from all the damage, which never really got into a syncopation. I mean, there was always a different feel and tear and sound, which I think was really disconcerting for those in the back as well, who were closer to the sound, I think. And then the rapid depressurization. I know it's a mouthful, but everybody has seen one. If you see a balloon pop, you've seen a rapid depressurization, and it's air equalizing pressure, and it does so rapidly and with force. We were at 33,000 feet equalizing our cabin pressure, which was at 7,000 at that point, 70 degrees inside the cabin, negative 25 outside. And then the roar that came along that never went away, that grew, and it just got to a certain decimal, and it just stopped because there was no more available. And it smothered every sound in a way that Darren and I, we only sit 1.5 feet apart, but we couldn't even hear our own voice over it. And so that, of course, is caused by all the wind coming in that one window. When you go down the road at 60 miles an hour, you know how disconcerting that one window down can be, not just from the sound, but also from the reverberation of 60-mile-an-hour wind trying to get out of that window that it's also coming in. And we were 550 miles an hour plus whenever this happened. So there was just a lot of dynamic air temperature, pressure, things going on. And Darren and I think we both kind of had a moment of isolated, adrenaline-filled time there when you can't really see anything or communicate, and you have stabbing pain in your ears as your eustachian tubes collapse, and then realizing you're not breathing very well. And after we got it back in, we got our oxygen masks on. We did it one at a time because at that point we needed both feet, both hands, and full attention.
I was going to say, the first rule in aviation is maintain aircraft control.
Maintain aircraft control.
And that's what they did very well.
And then analyze the problem, take appropriate action, and then maintain situational awareness. So we kept control of the aircraft. The first problem was we needed oxygen. So we took care of that one at a time, and then figured out where we needed to go. Long runway, medical, within decent distance, which was Philadelphia. And
I like your radio calls too. I mean, it's just like calm as you could possibly be. I'm just going, you got to be kidding me. I think my voice would go up real high, but no, she's, hey, mayday, mayday, mayday. Hey, we got an engine. I think the words used were, we have an engine fire, and then you said you were losing some parts, I think, and it was...
Well, it was probably the fourth time that they asked me if I was declaring an emergency that I said, yes, we have parts missing, and someone went out. Because at that point, we didn't know all that had happened. We did know that there was a window out, and that we needed to slow down for the gentlemen who are helping. And I have to take a moment, anytime I speak about Flight 1380, I do want to highlight some passengers that got up and truly, along with the flight attendants, changed the ending of the day for those people. And that is Tim McGinty, Andrew Needham, and 78-year-old Peggy Phillips, who got up during this flight that was very rough and did CPR on Jennifer Reardon, our passenger that we were not able to return to her family.
Wow. Well, again, in the name of time, I've got to compliment you on hey, yes, you had good training. You did exactly what you were trained to do, and I say that for the airline pilots that are out there. That's our job. Our job is to handle situations just like that. And you made it look, I won't say routine, but hey, you did all the right things at the right time. Fortunately, unfortunately, there was one passenger lost, but it could have been, so much worse. And yeah, so well done. Hopefully there will never be another situation like that again. And if so, I hope somebody like you is in the cockpit to do it. So I compliment you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to go over, I can tell that already, but we're going to do a quick walk around of the aircraft. I'm going to start first with the N3N, and Claire is going to come up over here and talk a little bit. This is the 21-year-old who's, let's see, flew it in here. She's been flying it for 3 years. Her dad is the owner of the airplane over there too, and I'm hoping that she may turn into a future Air Force aviator, but I don't know. We'll or Navy. It's okay. But
we have to
but
talk,
yeah, we'll
Claire.
see. But experienced pilot. Started flying in J3s, and go ahead. And where'd you go from there? J3s, and then.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started in a J3 Cub when I was probably 13. I remember my first flight lesson with my dad. We have a airstrip in northern Wisconsin, a grass strip, 2,000 feet, and so. I remember the first day I was taxiing, and 13 years old, I didn't really know how to move my feet quite correctly, and I thought I was going to go in the hayfield, and he said, no, just keep going, you're not going to go in. So that was my first memory of taxiing the J3 Club, and of course, you know, now taxiing this thing is a beast, but that definitely prepared me. So yeah, I started at 13 probably, I mean, not officially, but, and then at 15, I decided to take a little break. My brother passed away in an aircraft accident, and so I just wasn't quite into the aviation at that point, but maybe around 16 or 17, I just knew that he absolutely loved aviation, and I wanted to continue that passion in my family and be the next generation of pilot. So at 17, on the morning of my junior prom, I soloed our family 150, and then about a year later in 2020, COVID hit, school shut down, but of course, aviation didn't shut down. You know, flying a 150 around alone in the air was the perfect way to spend COVID. So 2020, I got my private pilot's license, and I went off to UW-Madison, and then on winter breaks, I would normally work on my writtens, and then in the summer, I did my instrument rating. The following summer, I did my commercial rating, and then this past January, I got my commercial multi-engine rating, and now here we are. And so I guess when I was 19, I was able to take the N3N around the patch for the first time alone, and that was super exciting. And now I've just kind of in the summers when I'm home, I absolutely loved to fly it with my dad, and flying it in this year was incredible, and the Fisk arrival and landing it right on the green dot was just something that I've dreamed of my entire life. So it was great to be able to experience that, and now being here surrounded by, you know, these amazing women in aviation is just a great experience. So I'm so happy to be here, and thank you so much for having us and the N3N on display. How
about the history? How long have you had the N3N?
So I believe my dad and his sister, Heidi, went to pick it up in Florida when he was maybe 21 and she was 16, and they flew it from Florida to Wisconsin in 1990. So we've had it in the family for a little over probably 30 years.
Wow.
So yeah, I've grown up with it, and I've never really truly understood the history until we've kind of been preparing for this, and you know, knowing all the different naval aviators that had trained in this, and it was on floats at the Naval Academy, is just, you know, incredible to be able to fly this piece to history. And if only an airplane could talk, that'd be incredible to hear the stories that it's.
How about some differences? You know, everybody looks at it and says, "Oh, it looks like a Stearman."
Right, exactly. So I think some of the main differences are that it has 4 ailerons, and then it's also a little bit heavier than a Stearman, and then the landing gear is completely different. I think the rudder also is different, and then I think the main part is that it's all aluminum, and so I believe that Stearman have some like piping, and so that there can lead to some corrosion in there that you just wouldn't know about. So the nice thing about the N3N is that you can see everything, and so if there's any corrosion or anything happening with that, you can, you know, be sure to tackle that right away, and there's no surprises for you. I think those are the main ones. Oh, we also have removable wingtips. So it was a World War II trainer. So I think a lot of the cadets would ground loop it, and so they could just run out, switch the wingtips, and keep on moving. So, yeah.
But you've never done that.
Nope, don't plan on it either.
That's a good thing.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, well, thank you for allowing us to have the beautiful airplane here. Congratulations on flying it in, too. Good luck flying it out. That's always exciting also.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm going to stop there again. I know we're running out of time, but I'm going to talk to the Growler guys here for and girls, excuse me, for a minute and just say, yep. All right. Shelby.
Yes, hello.
United States Naval Academy 2014, okay? Oh.
The red one, sounds good.
And Whidbey Island, and I'll stop there and just give us a little history of the airplane and how long you've been there, et cetera. We're going to get Tammy Joe to come up, and maybe the two of you could maybe just walk around and tell some differences. This is a Super Hornet that's been modified to be a Growler. If y'all didn't know, a Growler, it basically replaced the EA-6B, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. EA-6B was a jammer. I flew with them many times, standoff jammer, in close, whatever you want to do. The problem with the EA-6B was it was big, it was slow. Hey, they couldn't go in with you. Well, guess what? These folks can go in with you, and you desperately need them if you're going in today's war with all the electronics that are out there. Hey, you want these guys. The beeps and squeaks is what we were talking about. So yeah, go ahead and tell us a little bit about the airplane and where you guys are from.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So we're from Whidbey Island, Washington, where most of our Growler squadrons are located. VAQ-129 is the fleet replacement squadron. So we are in charge of instructing the next generation up in this aircraft. So our main focus for this aircraft is detection and suppression of enemy radiation and enemy employers. So we're mostly focusing on a air-to-ground mission, and we're supporting entities that need to get in close to take out those targets or get into an area. We're out there kind of suppressing anything that would detect them or cause them harm.
And you're an EWO, correct?
Yes, sir.
Electronic Warfare Officer. So she sits in the back there and got all the stuff, okay? The guy up front does the pilot stuff, okay? And hey, she's the one who's sitting there, and hey, she can tell when she gets lit up by a variety of systems, and hey, she can shut them down. And they don't have any of the pods. Typically, a mission with this airplane, how many pods do you have on board the airplane?
Yeah, we can usually take up to 3 pods as a standard loadout, and we fly usually in a section of Growlers so that we can offer suppression from different angles.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And I'll ask Tammy Joe. Okay, difference between what you flew and this thing right now, Super Hornet versus the normal Hornet that you flew.
Well, for one thing, it's bigger, square intakes, and I don't know that the pylons are any different. Are they different?
They're slightly canted, but not
okay.
so different, yes.
Okay, and we would often carry the 500 pound fuel tanks on either side with then a TAC or a pod. We did a lot of missile simulation. I don't know if you do that, but silkworm missiles were a big simulation that we did for ships.
Okay, we still do carry simulated missiles, and we are able to carry air-to-ground and air-to-air weaponry on board. And in a full battle Growler configuration, we'll usually have 2 pods on each wing and 1 in the center line, and then the fuel tanks on the wings as well with with our able to employ off the wingtips for air-to-ground and air-to-air. Yes, so it's a very heavy aircraft once we get fully loaded up. So it's definitely a fun challenge for our pilots.
Okay. I'm going to say it's 11 o'clock. They're going to start giving me the hook here right now. I'll say thank you for right now, but we're going to open it up to questions now. And we've got people in the audience now. I'm going to open it up and say it's a free-for-all. So if you want to ask questions about the N3N, about the Growler, about Tammy Joe, about Claire, I'm sure there are some questions out there. So who do we got? First question. There's one in the corner over there.
Some of our EWOs are qualified in private pilots, but we are not qualified as pilots in this airframe.
Okay.
Tammy, what was your call sign in the military?
Bonnie. I know, it's not very exciting, but I was glad I didn't earn an exciting one. My first instructor's call sign was Clyde, and so the schedulers saw my maiden name, which was Bonnell, and thought, So they put us on the schedule as Bonnie and Clyde and giggled like schoolgirls every time they called us to say our jet was ready, but that's it, Bonnie.
Thank you.
All right, other questions? Okay, we got some down here. Wait, she'll give you a mic. Oh, wait, we have one over here. Okay, we'll get to you. Hold on a second. Go ahead, over on this side.
Yeah, Tammy, during the incident, you had initial control issues. Did those continue with you till landing?
So the control issues, the snap roll that we did to 41 degrees, that was brought on by the explosion, and that wing kind of stopping like it was a sea anchor, the other wing going so quickly, which gave it more lift, that gave us that snap roll, the pitch over. So we certainly were able to keep control of the aircraft. We did have a little roll problems turning left into that engine. We had to do that very carefully, or wanted to overbank. But we lost it. It severed hydraulic lines, fuel lines, things like that on that side. So there was some degradation of control, but mainly it was just the fact that we had so much damage, and those pieces of cowling that were flailing in the wind at the wing of the root just made it it was like flying through boulders rather than that slipstream that you're normally feeling.
Okay. Next, over here.
I actually have a question for Claire. I'm a 17-year-old student pilot. I'm about to really close to get my private. How many hours did you have when you and how many hours do you have now?
So when I got my private pilot, I probably had around 70 hours. I got very lucky that I grew up where I grew up, and so I had airplanes at my disposal to kind of fly whenever I wanted. Right now I have just over 300 hours. So yeah. And good luck.
Thank you so much.
All right, anything else for any of the people up here? Okay. Well, I will say now, if there's no other questions, we have one other presentation to make. And I'll get a member of my staff. I see, there's Connie back there. Yeah, Connie is going to help out on this. And afterwards, by the way, if you haven't read her book, Nerves of Steel is the name of the book. She's just basically talked about the tip of the iceberg here. She's got some great stories. She's left some of the really bad stories out. I'll say that right now. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that. And she went through much more than she admits to right now in some of her naval career, and I'll be honest with you, I thought some of this stuff was inappropriate, some of the things that happened to you, but I grew up in that world also. I was one of those fighter guys, and I knew some of the guys who said, no, somebody like that doesn't deserve to do what we do. You have obviously proved them wrong. I'm happy to say that. Oh, and we were talking about the combat exclusion also. The combat exclusion was in place basically the entire time that you were flying the United States Navy, and then they lifted it. I want to say that would have been probably '93, somewhere along in there, and now. Females, hey, they can go beyond the support role, which is what you were in, basically. And I found it interesting also, a sidelight, carrier qual pilot, okay, and an instructor in carrier quals, yet they didn't let you land at night. Is that right?
Well, right. If you weren't ship-based, then there was no need to put you through that qual. So,
which to me, I'm just going, huh? You got to be kidding me. They wouldn't let her land at night on the ship, and I'm just going, huh? I didn't get that one. But now they're full up. Now they deploy full operational squadrons. They go to sea. Normal. They're just like everybody else out there. And I think it interesting that at the current time, or last week, I guess it was, President Biden nominated the newest CNO. If you all haven't seen that, Lisa Franchetti, Admiral, was just nominated. She hasn't been appointed yet, but she's going to be the highest-ranking naval officer, which I find rather interesting. And she's not a flyer, you know, what can I say? But nonetheless.
Then we'll have to wait and see.
Yes, yeah, we will. We'll have to wait and see. But what we have here, we have a volunteer who, his call sign is Chaco, by the way. Yeah, well, guess why, you know, okay? And so we've got some memorial chalks for you, and you can use them if you want. She flies a Malibu now, right? Okay, that's their airplane that they go around in. And if you want to use it on the Malibu, I'm sure it'll work. But it's got your name on one side of it. It's got an F-18 Hornet on the other side of it. He signed it on the bottom, and his standard is an A4. His name is Dave Jackson. And if you see him around here, we'll introduce you. But I just, you know, when I turned into a commander way back when, I had a commander's coin, and I always wanted people to remember, you know, who gave them that coin. Just like I'd like you to remember who gave you this chalk. And so I just happen to have a little sticker that says United States Air Force on it. So Tammy Joe.
It will be my lucky chalk.
I say thank you very much for what you've done. And not to be outdone, Claire, we have a chalk for you also. It is a Warbirds in Review chalk, and yeah, and I say thank you to you also. I appreciate it. The last thing I'll say is that Tammy Joe is going to be in the merchandise building right behind us here. She's got the books, the book that she wrote back there. She'll be happy to autograph them and take pictures and stuff like that. So she'll be back there, I don't know, for an hour or so, somewhere along in there. But yeah, I say thank you so much. It's been an honor.
Aviation, the art of aeronautics, began with the dreamers, inventors and daredevils who dared to defy gravity. The journey of aviation was nurtured by pioneers like the Wright brothers, whose first flight marked a historic milestone. The role of aircrafts in world wars was groundbreaking, dramatically changing warfare strategies. This initiated a technological evolution in aviation, transforming the simplistic wings of a biplane into the thunderous roar of jet engines. Let's journey through the ages of aviation. Behind every great aircraft, there were great minds. These visionaries, like Sir Frank Whittle, the innovator of the turbojet engine, redefined air travel. Then there's Skunkworks' Kelly Johnson, the genius behind the SR-71 Blackbird. His designs combined speed, stealth and power, crafting machines that dominated the heavens. The contributions of these pioneers have left an indelible mark on the canvas of aviation, shaping the course of history and inspiring generations of engineers and aviators. Each epoch in aviation history gave birth to extraordinary aircrafts, each with their own unique features and roles. The Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird was a marvel of speed and stealth. The F-105 Thunderchief, a supersonic fighter bomber, was vital in the Vietnam War. The P-51 Mustang, a long-range fighter, was critical in World War II. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a heavyweight fighter, was used extensively in the same war. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, is a close air support icon. The Messerschmitt ME-262 marked a leap forward in aviation technology. Each of these game changers were instrumental in their eras, and their legacies still resonate today. Beyond the game changers, there are those that have transcended their practical roles to become icons. The Concorde was not just an aircraft, it was a supersonic symbol of luxury and speed. The B-52 Stratofortress, a strategic bomber, is an icon of power and resilience. These magnificent machines and others like them have become much more than just aircrafts. They are enduring icons that encapsulate the audacious spirit, the relentless innovation, and the boundless ambition that define the world of aviation. For more amazing aerial footage, and to join us in this incredible journey, check out the DroneScapes YouTube channel.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.